Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast. A podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and any other tangent that I happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, or a casual observer, or anyone else just floating through, you're going to probably waste a few minutes listening to what I have to say, and I hope you find it interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists, and if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com, and I'll get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube on Wednesday nights around 9:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or on Twitter at the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com, and that is a place to pick up these links, episode details, and even some one-off tasting notes and anything else. Today is January the 19th, 2022, and we're going to talk about change management. Before we get into that, we always do a little bit of pre-show chat, and I apologize for the audio clip at the beginning of this. That's actually supposed to be an outro clip, and there's an intro clip, and I've been toying around with changing a few things and doing something slightly different. Also apologize for the video. It looks like, at least according to the YouTube stream, it looks like maybe real washed out. May have just lost the stream altogether. Can't tell. It's super glitchy on my computer. Been also toying with doing a weekly or bi-weekly news segment, just kind of a one-off, quick video, amalgamating a bunch of different news that I happen to come across things that I find interesting. It kind of came out of this story that was published about the like a shortage of wood for making barrels in North America. And if you're a bourbon fan, that's a huge problem, because one of the stipulations for bourbon specifically is that it has to be in new charred oak barrels as opposed to being reused for maybe American single malts or scotch or a host of other whiskeys that are out there. And so I started poking around on this news story, because whenever I read that, that's a shocking headline for me. And what it actually indicates is a lot of other things, like the problem being that most of the barrels, or most of the trees that exist right now, are actually too old for what we would consider healthy forests. And so there could be a shortage in the future, just simply because man, my YouTube's acting super glitchy. Let me go look at this. Sorry. It says it's fine. Not receiving enough. No, we'll keep going forward and see what happens. And if the video is bad, then I'll just upload the recording that I'm actually making of this, and we'll make that work. Whatever happens, I guess. But anyways, it was more about wood's health. It was more about problems with how old the trees are that are out there being farmed currently. And it wasn't so much as almost a call to Chicken Little. And so I thought, hey, this is something that a bunch of us read, and I've seen people talking about it on other streams, and maybe this would be interesting to sort of break down, because the initial reaction was slightly different than what the reality of what's going on is. Try a couple things here. Stream health is looking very terrible. Starting to catch up. Excellent condition. I don't know. One of the other things that I came across this week, there is move. All right, there. I talked about this a little bit on a different social media platform. On TikTok, I put a video up. I'm not really sure what the purpose of TikTok is, but hey, I made a video and I put it up. I've been noticing a significantly larger quantity. Larger quantity of people that are joining what I called a bourbon bully on that video, but there's going to be an inherent amount of snobbery that's going to exist in whiskey. That's just sort of what happens. But it can get a little bit cumbersome and a little bit intrusive into people. And so what ends up happening is you get these people that build their entire persona or character off of being the only person that knows how to taste or knows how to be able to give you tasting notes or lead you into what is appropriate. And while there are people that make an entire profession about it, most of the people that at least I interact with on social media, on YouTube, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever, they're all interested in entertaining and joining people together. And that type of behavior doesn't really fit along with that. We're not necessarily industry professionals that are out there trying to purport ourselves to create beverage lists for restaurants or create new cocktails or whatever. We're just sort of having fun, and we've got to be okay with that, you know. And this kind of snobbery sort of pushes people off, and you know, there's a difference between being helpful and being firm and just trying to be you know, a shocking personality that's going to say, oh, you're all wrong and I'm right. You know, you're all crap and I'm the best. And, you know, it's super frustrating. And one of the things that I guess that breaks down for me is that flavor is relative. You know, you get these people that are getting off on giving tasting notes and that they know what's there and you don't. You can't taste something you've never tasted before. And so if someone gives you a tasting note, and if you guys go back and watch the Chill Filtered episode that I did with Robbie and Cole, he gave me a flavor that I've never heard of before. And then he related it to something that I did understand, which is elderberry flower. But the original flavor that he gave, I don't know what it is. I never had heard it before in my lifetime, and I could not ever connect with that flavor. If someone tells me, hey, this tastes like banana, banana could be a banana itself, an actual banana. It could be banana ice cream. It could be banana runts. It could be banana-flavored cough syrup. It could be any flavor of banana, and that's what's going to come to mind. So it's a problem with tasting notes is that it's relative. You can't taste what you've ever tasted before, and whatever you taste is actually what you taste. You know, it's all about triggering a memory within your brain of some flavor profile somewhere, and so you're likely not wrong with whatever you taste because it is what you taste. And so, you know, the best thing you can do is find somebody who gives tasting notes on things that you sort of align to, and now you can find somebody that has a similar palate or a similar profile, and maybe that person can give you suggestions on what to drink or what not to drink. But at the end of the day, you know, these folks that sort of want to jump in there and tell you what to think and tell you what is right and what is wrong, they're a little bit wrong-headed in that. You know, and who am I to say anything different? But it is what it is. The topic of today's episode, and it won't be probably won't be super long tonight. I think I've said that the last couple of episodes. But the goal of tonight's conversation is going to be around change management, and that's one of the things that outside of whiskey everyone sort of understands. And in my profession, a lot of what I do is change management, and for something like whiskey, change can be difficult. And last week I had a conversation with somebody on, I think it was Instagram, I can't remember, where they were referring to that they prefer a specific brand or distillery that can consistently produce the exact same flavor profile over and over again. And that's what a lot of distilleries bank on. You know, week in and week out, they create these huge chains of efficiencies to be able to generate the exact same thing over and over again. Whenever I was younger, my dad was into brewing his own beer. And one of the most amazing feats for anybody who brews beer is understanding how people like Anheuser-Busch or Coors can continually create the exact same flavor profile over and over again in what is effectively, during the fermentation process at least, a living organism that could be impacted by so many environmental concerns. They can create something that today is going to taste the exact same as something that is 5 years from now. And even within the whiskey industry, you'll find guys that'll save a bottle of Maker's Mark and they'll taste it against a new one to see if there's any flavor drift or any profile drift from what it was 5 years ago to what it is today, because they do slightly change. But those are small incremental changes that occur over time. And the reality is within whiskey, until probably 20 years ago, the fact that it wasn't changing was the bread and butter of whiskey marketing. It was the bread and butter of what bourbon was doing in North America. But we also kind of see where that kind of mindset is going to get you. It's going to get you into a limited marketplace that people aren't interested in. They want to see something that's slightly different. And that's what you see, or at least that's what I experience with things like Barrel Spirits or Stag Junior, or Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, Larceny Barrel Proof. Barrel Spirits' entire profile is based off of building different batches and no two bottles necessarily being the exact same. Stag Junior, looks like it's glitching out again. Fantastic. Stag Junior, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, Larceny Barrel Proof, all of those are batched. Those are all going to be different, and that's part of the allure of them, is that you want to pick up each different version. It's sort of funny, when you get into check this stream here. Well, maybe it's going to pop back up again. When you get into social media whiskey and you start making friends, you end up with things called handshakes, where you're getting samples that people are going to share with you. And I actually have a sample of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof B521. So that's the second release from this year, or from 2021 rather. I guess we're already in 2022. One of the things that people want to do is they want to collect it. It's all three of them. They want to collect the A, the B, and the C. And they want to compare them against each other. And it's one of those things that's sort of the thing now. And I tend to look at any brand or distillery like my favorite restaurant. I don't have a favorite restaurant because it's one singular dish that they do well and that they do the exact same thing over and over again. I look for a place that can give me about 15 different things that are going to be all amazing. Seasonal ingredients, new and unique offerings, whatever they can do to differentiate themselves from a marketing standpoint. That's what I'm interested in. And that's what a lot of consumers are interested in as well. So it's a little bit troubling for the whiskey marketplace, and you see fallout whenever they try to do things different, or at least some of the major retailers try to do things different. It's almost like if you're a small player within the whiskey marketplace, you're cheered for doing something different, but if you're a major player and you do something different, it's an immediate mark against you. It's you're going against your standards or your principles or whatever it is that you're built on. Change is the name of the game. That's what's going to happen. So one of the first ones that I want to talk about is probably one of the most slammed on, well, probably not the most slammed on bottle that I know of is probably Willet Pot Still. But aside from that, there's, Basil Hayden Toast, or Basil Hayden specifically is going to be considered, a whiskey that non-whiskey drinkers drink. It's an entry-level drink. It's whatever. But in the last few years, they have gone out and tried to get a hold of, let's see if I close a few other things, if maybe that'll help. They've gone out and tried to redo some of the things that they're working on. Jim Beam has looked at what the Basil Hayden brand is. They've redesigned their bottles. They've introduced alternate offerings underneath the label. Their 10-year, their Caribbean, their dark rye, their, a host of other things. But then very, very recently, they introduced Toast, and it was one of those things that got panned pretty heavily within the social media marketplace, where everybody was like, oh, great, another, toasted whiskey, another rice whiskey or whatever. But Jim Beam's been innovating for a long time. I mean, the Basil Hayden is just picking up on some of the things that they've been doing for a while. I mean, if you go back to the Signature Craft series a dozen or more years ago, they were doing Signature Craft brown rice, which I've talked about in another episode before. And you see brown rice getting introduced into the Booker's, I believe, is the one that got a brown rice offering in there. Maybe it was Little Book. I can't remember which one. But anyways, they got into it. And so Basil Hayden, and my assumption is that Jim Beam's like, hey, we've got this big batch of rice-based bourbon. What are we going to do with it? And so they start kind of portioning out to the different brands that they have, the different things that they can possibly do with it. They put it under the Jim Beam label. They put it under the Little Book or Booker's. I think maybe it's Little Book, and then they put it under the Basil Hayden brand and try to put it out there. But the thing is, they were doing these sort of innovative concepts and ideas years and years before. Maybe it was sort of cool to do, because if you go back 12 years, yeah, so you're exactly right. Okay, so I've got a comment here. It should pop up on the screen, where we've got don't like toast, but putting out Old Tub was a hit. And that's exactly it, is that for you don't particularly care for the toast, but you did like Tub, and there may be an exact inverted relationship with someone else where they love the toast but don't love the Old Tub. And that's the thing, is that we need to be, as a consumer, willing to give them a shot whenever they want to try something like this out. And it may not be for us. And luckily, the Basil Hayden toast wasn't an incredibly expensive offering. It was something that was relatively easily attainable after the initial hype hit, and it's okay. It's something that I can share with people, and specifically, it's something that I can keep around whenever I have visitors come to my house that are not bourbon drinkers. It's easy to drink. It's something that's slightly different. It does give a slightly different flavor profile that they can try to chase down. And maybe it's a way to get them into a deeper concept of whiskey, because it's not just Basil Hayden. It's Basil Hayden with a twist or whatever. But if we don't, to some degree, reward, and I'm not talking about rewarding, just like marketing hype, but legitimate innovation. If we don't reward that, they won't continue it. That's sort of how it works within the marketplace itself. And then on the converse, we've got this change that's happening with Stag Junior versus Stag, right? And so this year, in 2022, Stag Junior should be losing the junior moniker. And the idea is that when it hits its 18th batch, which should be very, very soon, it's matured enough to not be considered a junior. And the idea is that if they can change its name, they can help its perception. And that may be the case with a non-whiskey aficionado, where they see it and they're like, well, why is it called Stag Junior? E.H. Taylor is called Junior, but that's an actual human being's name, and you can tell that, just the way it's put together, it's a human being's name, and it's named after that. Whereas with Stag Junior, it's like, okay, well, there's Stag Junior, but there's also George T. Stagg, so is it really that much inferior? And for a lot of people, it absolutely will be inferior, but it's slightly easier to obtain, and it is a fantastic bottle in its own right. And a lot of the people that are proponents of a change like this are saying, well, look at what Rebel Yell did. Rebel Yell used to be Rebel Yell, and then they changed their name to Rebel, so they wouldn't be as nearly as offensive. But I don't think those two things can be correlated. I think those two things are inherently different. The idea is that it's almost like the folks at Buffalo Trace are saying, we know you as an American consumer have such a short attention span that in 6 months to a year, you won't remember that it was called Stag Junior. It's just called Stag. By taking those two simple letters off of it, they can increase the prestige. And my assumption is, and this may follow to be true, may not follow to be true, is that once that Junior has been removed from the label and the prestige factor is increased on it, likely so will the price point. And I'm not saying that that's not deserved, because the MSRP on Stag Junior is already incredibly low for what it is in my mind, in my impression. But there's likely more at play here, and it's also interesting that we're starting to see another resurgence in single barrel picks coming from them as well. Stag Junior is I've at least seen 3 or 4 different channels that have talked about channels or social media types or retailers that are talking about being able to pick up Stag Junior, which will effectively be Stag, I guess. Maybe I wonder if the barrel picks will maintain the Junior and they can use up all the old bottling labels, and only the new product for batch 18 and beyond will, I don't know. That's their problem to work out, not mine. but they're trying to craft this story, and I'm all about stories, but this one is a little bit weak in its structure. Is the fact that Stagg Jr. has grown from a boy into a man because it's at its 18th batch. That doesn't, it doesn't hold weight, because at the end of the day, it's still 8 or 9 year old whiskey in a barrel. It's not 18-year-old whiskey, and that's okay. It's I think they're putting too much weight on the junior. Now, is it, like I said, there's something else at play here, in my impression. And if you look far enough down the line, something else will get tied to it. Some other reactionary situation is happening here. I don't know what it is, and there's no conspiracy to it. There's a marketing plan in place, obviously, and they felt like this was a smart decision, and there are people making significant amounts of money to be able to make decisions like this. So there's something to it, but also at the same time, they're making marketing decisions like, hey, we're just not going to release George T. Stagg at all in 2021 because the barrels did not meet the standards. And absolutely, sometimes the marketing is out of hand. I mean, I'm the first to absolutely celebrate a fantastic marketing story, because storytelling is a key facet to, at least for me, a key facet to enjoyment of most anything. There's a lot of research that says stories are far stickier than data is, and everyone has an impression based off of a story of just about anything that they consume. If there is a story related to it, it creates an impression. For some of the more significant whiskey snobs, the fact that there are marketing stories that don't necessarily align with truth, they have a negative impression of that particular brand because of that story. And so they may decrease the value or their interpretation of what that is just because the story exists. And so it has an impact on everyone. And that's, at the end of the day, we talked about it during the blind tasting with Cole and Robbie. The reason blind tastings are so scary is simply because it can prove that you like something you say you don't like, or that you don't like something that you say you do like. If you get rid of the story entirely, then it changes it. But the flip side of that is, likely, as soon as you know what it is, the next time you taste it, you'll be back to that, because stories are sticky. They create impressions, and they're very, very hard to overcome. And that's what's sort of cool about it for me. And yes, lore is important. I mean, it's why people, to me, it's why people are interested in Scotch or Armagnac or wines or any of the darker spirits. There's not a lot of lore behind clear spirits. And when I say clear spirits, I guess maybe we don't talk about, agave-based spirits. I'm talking more along the lines of vodka, gin, things like that. And maybe even not gin, like some gins, like bathtub gins, or gins that are made from herbals that are grown on small farms. Like, there's always a story that can be told, and then it's going to increase people's potential enjoyment. And then there's changes that are perceived really poorly, and you wonder, are they marketing gimmicks as well? So the Stagg Jr. is a clear marketing gimmick that is going to lead to something else. And then there's Maker's Mark. Right, and so if we run back a few years, we get this announcement. I don't know. I think it's in 2013, maybe. We get this announcement from Maker's Mark where they're going to decrease their proof because they have a shortage of whiskey on hand. They're going to cut it from 90 down to 84, 86, something along that lines. And it was a discussion that they went through for a very, very long time in their business meetings. And they're not wrong. I mean, they were experiencing a significant uptick in whiskey consumption. They're going to take it down to 84% or 84 proof. They're experiencing a significant uptick in whiskey consumption, and they were also, which we would find, several years later, doing a significant amount of innovative study that is going to take from their traditional whiskey stores. And so they put out this press release that they're going to decrease from 90 to 84, and the whiskey world throws a giant fit. Everybody's like, "Oh, this is the worst thing you could ever do. Why would you do this? It's already low enough proof. proof, and they had proven, at least with their some of their foreign bottlings, those that are I think in Europe and Japan, they were putting out a 95 proof, slightly older whiskey that is touted by many as one of the best Maker's Marks that there are out there. And so they put the story out, and then within 3 days they reversed their decision. And my question is were there any bottles ever made? And if there are, can I have one, please? Because I would love to have that weird piece of whiskey trivia to sit on my shelf and taste side by side with the rest of them. But was that decision something they were never actually going to do? They were just trying to drum up interest in their normal shelf staple. Were they just saying, hey, we're going to do this, and whenever, you create this massive rush of people out there, running out there to grab up whatever is, remove. Sorry. Had to get rid of that. Got a spam message in here. Hey, I'm finally picking up some popularity. If I'm getting some bots in the channel, that means somebody's paying attention. That's fantastic, right? I joked at the last episode, being a small channel with a small following, you can't be accused of purchasing your followers because the minimum purchase is still beyond the amount of people that follow me right now. But anyways, so Maker's Mark, and I would say, at least from the major brands, Maker's Mark, right, people ran out, they scooped up the regular Maker's Mark stuff, and I would say in the last 10 years, they've probably been the kings of innovation, at least in my mindset, in the major whiskey producers, in a major whiskey producers line. Some of the other distilleries out there are doing innovative things, but they're doing it with secondary lines. I mean, you think about Heaven Hill, you think about Woodford, you think about Jim Beam, you think about Buffalo Trace. They all have this huge number of lines that they can do their experimentation with, and Maker's Mark has always just had Maker's Mark, and it took them a long time to get to Maker's 46, and now we see the wood finishing series. Now we're seeing these DNA series where they're doing some experiments with barrel entry proof or whatever. But these experiments, to be able to be, so like the DNA example is a good one for me. To be able to have that bottle today, they started that experiment 8 years ago into the barrel, which means the idea was maybe probably 2 years before that. So we're talking like 10 years ago. Somebody said, hey, we should try to do this thing. And so if you chart the path of when the bottles became available and you go back about 10 years, that's when they started having those innovative ideas. And they did it within a brand that had been virtually unchanged for 50 years. That was the entire concept of it. They absolutely catered to their audience. And there's no such thing as bad publicity, I think, is the phrase you're looking for. The statement here is bad publicity is good publicity, but there's no such thing as bad publicity for them. But yeah, so a bunch of people run out there, buy it. They then retract their statement, so a whole bunch of people are left with Maker's Mark, and there's nothing wrong with that because you can still absolutely drink that. I'm probably going to sneeze, so I may have to mute it here a second. It keeps going away. All right, we'll move on. We'll just take a drink of this. This is some 1792 full proof. Maybe that'll burn down the sneeze that's trying to come out of there. So all of the whiskey, all of the whiskey marketing aside, the way they've changed their brand, and I got called out by somebody for being maybe a Maker's Mark fanboy, and you can't see it because they're dark, but there's a whole bunch of Maker's bottles here. But all of the bottles that I have on my shelf are ones that were a result of their marketing innovation that they're trying to do. What's being called the license plate series, the community batches, some single barrels, some wood finishing series, some of the FAEs that are around mouthfeel and the DNA and the host of things that they're doing. With a single line, they've been able to innovate with 40 or 50 different offerings, which is pretty impressive to me, at least. they, I heard Fred Minnick was I think maybe it's a podcast. I can't remember. I've listened to enough things, and then I start talking about it, and I just sort of forget. And so I know this came from Fred Minnick. Don't know when it was, but he was talking about he had the opportunity to have a taste of some 15-year Maker's Mark, and he looked at the master distiller at the time and said, "Hey, if you guys released this, y'all would destroy the entire marketplace." And you got to imagine that at some point in time, that's probably going to happen, but they're slow to change. But when they do, they seem to make the right choices, with the exception of saying, "Hey, we're gonna lower our proof. We're gonna decrease it down to 84 proof whiskey or whatever." And then the last one that I have to talk about. So we're at 31 minutes. Thank you guys for sticking this out. Dickel bourbon, and this one is not. It's technically not a change, right? Like they didn't change anything besides some labeling. So we saw the entry into the marketplace, the bottle that answers the question, is Jack Daniel's bourbon? You've had this question that people like to argue, is Jack Daniel's bourbon? And legally it's not. Technically it could be defined as that. And Dickel Bourbon proved it, because they do the exact same processes with a significantly different flavor profile. They do the exact same processes that Jack Daniel's does. And they have released this year an 8-year-old bourbon. Yep, I did. I said it. They have released an 8-year-old bourbon, which is the exact same thing as what comes out of their Tennessee whiskey bottles. And the difference here is, explicitly, the difference is flavor profile. They have their they have their master distiller just tasting the barrels and saying, "Oh, this doesn't fit the traditional Dickel profile that we're after, the Tennessee whiskey Dickel profile, and so we're going to call this a bourbon." That's explicitly the difference between Tennessee whiskey and bourbon to this company is flavor profile, and that's fantastic. And I'm not one of those people that doesn't like Dickel. I enjoy it for what it is. It has its own unique flavor profile, and that's fine by me. And you see it in a lot of barrel blends, and you see it in a lot of sourced bourbons. They've probably created so many bourbon companies out there that you have no idea what you're doing. Specifically, if they distill it and then someone ages it somewhere else, they can do a little bit of Dickel. Is that what I'm saying? 3 times fast. I said that 3, right? Maybe if I finish these glasses here that I have, I've got this and an Elijah Craig, and if I finish those, it might not be possible for me to do that again. And thanks for being here tonight, guys. I appreciate it. There's 2 of you here. Super appreciative. I've got YouTube open on one side and my streaming software open on the other side. The streaming software doing just fine. YouTube acts like it's not working at all, and it's super sketch. So I appreciate you guys for being here and hanging out while I talk about nothing. And I'm getting like 400 messages on the side about other stuff and whatever. Now I don't get a message all day long, and then when I start this up, 47 things try to happen at one time. Let me go do this real quick. All right, so Dickel, and like I said, I appreciate this. This particular bottle, I have one. I went out and searched for it. Made sure I was able to pick one up, put it on the shelf in case it's a short-term offering that disappears from the whiskey realm at any point in time in the future. I think it's interesting. I like what they're doing. I like the idea that people are expanding their base offerings and making changes. And this all stems like this whole, and this is how it works for me, is I end up, cool. Thanks, Cliff. Yeah, I may have to pull this down and actually upload the recording that's happening on the streaming software, so it's just a complete clean cut. But I appreciate you guys for sticking it out with it's going in and out. But anyways, I appreciate what they're doing. I like the fact that they're going to take these risks. And, this is how I end up with an idea is I have a conversation with a person. I'm like, you know what? That's what I'm going to talk about next week. And, I've learned a few things in the past couple of months that I could do to increase my viewership by making shorter videos and talking about lists and giving tasting notes and doing all these things. But that's not really the identity of what I'm doing here. And I'll continue down this path until it gets boring, and then I'll do something different. But for those of you guys that showed up, I super appreciate it. May see some changes. Next week, we'll hit the 1 year mark of the podcast. It's not the 1 year mark of the YouTube portion of it, but a year ago, next Wednesday, will be the anniversary of when I released my first podcast episode. I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but probably not going to have a topic specifically to go over. May launch out the news series that I was talking about earlier on in the episode. But I appreciate you guys for being here. So thanks for joining me tonight or today, whenever you happen to rewatch all of this. Oh, hey, Jake, you are literally showing up late to the party. I'm about to close out for the night, but I appreciate you being here anyways. I hope you found this episode entertaining. If you did, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you are consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media at Twitter or Instagram using EmbellishPod. I'm also on TikTok now. Not sure how that platform works, but I'm giving it a shot. You can give me a follow and you can find out what's going on here. I can also be found on my website at embellishpod.com. All of my links, accounts, contact details, whatever. I'll be back again next week with another new offering for you. So until then, cheers and thanks for hanging out.